Good evening and welcome to OTF Connect's webinars. We're at the second last week of presentations, and I'm very excited for you to join us tonight for Andrew Bronski and Jamie Rayburn for their student-centered differentiating your classroom with voice and choice. It's such a great phrase. They've got a wonderful presentation ready for you, lots of examples, lots of practical ideas for you. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie and Andrew. Enjoy your presentation.
Hello everybody and welcome to our presentation. Andrew and I are so excited to have you all with us. As Trish mentioned, we are educators in the Waterloo Region District School Board, and I'm the English Department Head at Huron Heights Secondary School.
And hi everybody, as Trish said, my name is Andrew Bronski. I also teach in English at Huron Heights Secondary School in Kitchener. I just want to say thank you all for joining us tonight. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. I hope some of you are actually outside on your decks as you're doing this webinar. And thanks again for your time to be here.
Okay, and so without further ado, let's get into the presentation. So we're at the Waterloo Region District School Board, and thank you, Trish, for dropping our Twitter handles in there. So you're always welcome to connect with us in that way. Andrew and I both tend to be pretty active on Twitter, so yeah. Connect with us if you wish. So we wanted to talk a little bit about incorporating student voice and choice into your classroom. And so for the first thing we needed to do was to rethink the learning space within our classroom. And in thinking about that, that's in all aspects of your classroom. So instead of thinking about it as a classroom, we think about it as a space for learning. It's an environment where kids feel empowered to showcase their learning in a variety of ways. And so for us, we really wanted to kind of re-envision what the classroom looked like.
Yeah, for me, this has been a big change in my personal practice over the past little bit, a number of years. And I'd say at the core of it for me has been really trying to focus on my students' engagement in the classroom. Again, there's so many things, like going to learning, there's so many things we can do as educators to try and increase learning in our classrooms. But I think one of the key pieces to that is student engagement. And again, we'd love to think that they all just show up and no matter what we're doing, they're 100% engaged. But I think that's becoming less and less the case now these days. And so one of my personal goals in the past few years has been really trying to focus on student engagement. How do we increase that to really get the deep learning that we want from our students in the classroom? And I'm just putting Jamie, I don't think her mic's on.
Sorry, I turned it off so you wouldn't hear my children in the background. Okay, so what we wanted to do was we wanted to talk a little bit about what we see voice and choice as. And to be honest, one of the biggest shifts I think that many of us have had to really incorporate into our classroom is the idea of having honest conversations and letting kids do a lot of the talking. And so within that, you have to really think about how you're going to make a safe space for your kids to feel comfortable so that they're willing to bring their ideas to the classroom, but also are they willing to be honest about their abilities? I mean, we live in a society where we want to be perfect, and how do we get kids to really think about that it's okay not to be perfect, and in fact it's better to not be perfect, and that's how you actually, when you struggle, you actually learn. And so for us, it's thinking about how do we encourage those kids to have these honest conversations about their abilities. And in one of the biggest ways that we've actually had a lot of success with that is by showing them how we mess up in the classroom and how we mess up as learners. And so I think that for us it's really modeling what a good, honest conversation looks like and making sure that the students feel comfortable to share their experiences that way. And for me in the space, it's kind of making a bit of a shift between
having a teacher-centric classroom and being a bit more student-centric. As a teacher, I think you're definitely running the class and having a sense of control in that space, but I think we're also, as we're moving to more voice and choice and looking to increase student engagement, is giving a lot more ownership to their learning and also the demonstration of their learning. And so I think voice and choice really kind of plays into that space very well. And, you know, if you're looking for like those terms, they kind of like Trish said, she loves the idea of voice and choice. And one of my favorites is kind of like talking about that shift for a teacher in the classroom from moving to being that sage on the stage to, you know, the guide on the side, and looking at your space as a bit more of a coach in the classroom, definitely guiding your students through curriculum in the class, introducing topics, but then looking at giving them some ownership and some different responsibilities for how they can engage in that learning, and then what's the best way for them to demonstrate that learning to you.
And within that too, one of the biggest shifts I think that we've had to really get into is the idea that when students work on tasks, that they have to be different. That's probably the foundational piece of student voice and choice, is that not every student is going to the students aren't going to produce the same thing for you. You're going to give them the task, but what they actually, their finished product at the end, all of them should look different, because if you want them to be reflecting and finding meaning within it for themselves personally, there's no way you can have something that's the same coming out of each student. There's no way it can be the same product. It has to be different. And I think for us that can be kind of scary, because we're used to seeing the same thing from every student, and that every student, like the students want to see the exemplars of what does level 4 look like, and let me replicate that. Whereas this, it's really making them think about what's meaningful to them and making it authentic to their own learning. And so what we wanted to really also go back to is the idea of why. Why is this important? Simon Sinek is one of the most prolific authors, nonfiction authors of our times, I think, and he's written a lot of books about leadership. And one of like our personal favorites is a book called Start with the Why. And within there, he really makes us think about what are we doing and why do we do this. And so for us, like going back to thinking about what are we doing as educators, why or what do we want our students to be able to take away from the class when they've left. Thinking about that, the idea is that for us, we're really focused on giving kids the opportunity to have a voice. I mean, we live in a society where social media is rampant, and how do you make your voice stand out from the crowd, and how do you feel comfortable and to share what you're really thinking is really a powerful skill that we're going to need to have going forward in the future. And so thinking about how do we give students that opportunity to have a voice and then be proud of it can be very much a challenge. And so for us, that's something that's been pretty integral to why we want to do this.
Yeah, and for me, I kind of highlighted the idea of engagement already and really focusing on my students engaged in my classes. And I think by empowering them, give them a bit more voice and choice in their learning, that can definitely increase engagement in the class. And I also think it becomes then a great vehicle to get at the learning skills or global competencies or new pedagogies for deep learning, depending on where you're coming from and the lens you're looking at this with. But I think more and more looking at those soft skills in our students are becoming very important. And when you, again, kind of move away from that teacher-centered classroom to that more student-centric space and give them a bit more ownership for their learning, you can get at those skills like how are these independent workers, how are their critical thinking skills, how are their collaboration skills, and make that part of the vehicle as you work through this voice and choice space as well.
And so within that, Andrew and I were really very honored to have received a TLLP from the Ministry of Education last year. And one of the elements of our research project was thinking about how we can consider the overall expectations, and then how do we help our kids develop skills, and then to show their thinking rather than content regurgitation. Those have been some really key things that we've been focusing on at our school within our department. And so for us, we spent some really, he and I we truly spent a lot of time talking about what are we looking for our kids to be able to develop, what kind of skills are they wanting to have, and then how do we get them to demonstrate these in a way that's authentic to them, in a way that really showcases their abilities, but then also the abilities that they're not very strong at. How do we get them to enhance that? And then, but how do we track that by looking at the overall expectations so that we have data for assessment purposes? And so for us, that was a lot of research and a lot of time we spent looking at this idea.
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe worries a lot of teachers when they start thinking about voice and choice for their students is that assessment piece and how to get at the curriculum and how are they learning and how are you tracking that. And those are really good questions. And I can say from my own practice, and I think it's for Jamie here too, is it takes a long time to get to that evolution and start feeling comfortable in that space. I would say I started playing around with it maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and I've come a long way over the years now, but it's not something you kind of flip overnight. And so for us, I think one of the easiest ways to get at it was really looking at the overall expectations. So when you're teaching in your classroom, you're really trying to hit off those and get through that learning with the students in that space. And then that can happen in many different ways. But then when it comes to an assessment standpoint, it's working with your students so that they're clear and understand what they're supposed to be learning tied to the curriculum, and then giving them some freedom options for the ways to demonstrate that. And I think the kind of beauty of that space is that if you get there, by opening it up to the overall expectations and kind of tracking and assessing in that space, that also lends a space for you to have students have demonstrated their learning to you in different ways, as long as it's coming back to that curriculum, and that's kind of what you're assessing by.
One of the most effective things we did as a department last year was we actually sat down, we took some OT time and sat down with the curriculum, and we looked at our assessment plans for every single course in our department, and then we looked at each individual project or summative task that we were having our students do, and we spent a lot of time tagging off which curriculum overall expectations we were assessing for each task. And it was really fascinating because we know from Growing Success we have to be giving our students multiple opportunities to demonstrate the expectations. But what's been fascinating with that was that when you actually sit down and you look at what you're tracking, we found that we were definitely missing some of the overall expectations in terms of hitting them multiple times. All of them were being assessed at least once throughout the semester, but we actually discovered along the way that some of them were only being hit once, and therefore that's not in line with what Growing Success is looking for. And so we had spent a lot of time revamping our courses to make sure that we are giving multiple opportunities to demonstrate the overall expectations. This is a screenshot from Michelle Sorti, who happens to be one of the ministry's innovation officers. Trish, if you could put the link to the Twitter conversation, thank you. What was interesting was that this was actually earlier this week. He was tweeting about the idea of assessing by KITCA, or Knowledge Thinking Communication Application. And what's interesting is that I have worked in 2 different boards in my career, and in my previous board we assessed based on KITCA, and my mark book looked like a column for knowledge, a column for thinking, a column for communication, a column for application. And that's something that we've moved away from in our own practice in Waterloo Region. And so it's been really interesting to see this Twitter thread happening because a lot of boards report by KITCA, but a lot of boards also now are starting to report by the overall expectations. And so for us, we wanted to mention that in case people are concerned that maybe this is different than what you're used to in your board or used to seeing in general, that this is something that definitely is not quite clear in terms of that Growing Success talks about it as a balanced approach. And so we found this really fascinating when we were getting ready for this presentation, that there's definitely a lot of conversation about this within Ontario at the moment.
Yeah, and I think tied to that, I mean, it can work both ways, and we should be obviously working through the curriculum courses, for whatever course we're teaching, and we should also be using Kika as embedded throughout. And we just want to value here as we're talking about assessment, thinking about student voice and choice, and as you're thinking about that, we're going to kind of talk to you in that space of how we're tracking by the overall expectations. It can definitely be done by Kika as well, though, too. It's just important to kind of have that reflection, think about, okay, as you're giving students more options to demonstrate their learning to you in different ways, how do your rubrics, how do your assessments, how does your tracking reflect that? And so when we're going to speak to it, we're going to talk more to tracking by the overall expectations. You definitely can do that by Kika as well, and I think it lends itself to it as well, too.
One of the things here, it says talking about most recent and consistent on this slide. That's been a really big observation personally for me when we track by overall expectations, is that you definitely see the most recent, most consistent in a very clear fashion. And to be honest, one of the things that I love about it is that I've actually seen way more growth in my students, especially this semester. I've seen way more growth in their abilities by looking directly at the overall expectations in their assessment practices. And so it's really fascinating. And this is just one example that he's tweeting about giving based on the levels. But there are multiple examples out there right now. And so, yeah, just in taking a look at this and really thinking about most recent and most consistent. And I think, like, this is something that can be also a little bit confusing because it isn't really a clear science that in some ways you're actually looking at the idea of like that there are marks that you can actually omit and throw out, which we typically don't necessarily do, and we haven't in the past because we've only focused really on averaging. And this gives us the opportunity to really take a look at the skills that our students have, and then give a lot of credibility to the fact that they are showing us consistently this actual grade. Okay, so now we want to involve you guys. And we wanted to ask you guys, what do you think student thinking looks like? So if you want to add it to the chat, and feel free to add a whole bunch of ideas, what does student thinking look like? Okay, and how do kids demonstrate that to you? Thank you, Melanie, for that answer, by the way.
And as we're working through this, if anyone does have a microphone on their device, and we have a small group here, so feel free to jump on the mic as well, and just jump in the space too. Or if you're just working through text-based space, that's fine too.
Sorry.
And so Melanie, thank you. Say out there too that they wrote, and Melanie wrote here for you looking at the chat, that they might come up and ask a question, or hint that they want the answer, or they might seem frustrated. And yeah, I think those are really good points, Melanie. Thanks for sharing. And Laura, thank you for mentioning inquiries too. I think inquiry-based learning or kind of project-based learning are great ways to get at student voice and choice. We'll talk about some examples of that later, so I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I totally agree, it really depends on that process, because but as you highlighted there, the personal and collaborative, because they create visible trails of the thoughts. That's a great way of putting it. Thank you for writing that.
Okay, thank you, Bernadine and Melanie. Those are some interesting ideas as well. And both of you mentioned the idea of like teachers staying out of it or like staying back. Awesome. Letting them own the learning, absolutely. Asking questions and students talking. Awesome. Laura added creating and reflecting. Awesome. Definitely not, Melanie.
Yeah, Laura and Melanie, I agree with you talking about not getting in the way as an educator, and I think it's a really interesting space. I think, again, I was pretty traditional in my practice and had a very teacher-centered classroom, like kind of me speaking at the core of a lot of the learning. And it was definitely a shift for me over the years to move back and create more of a space for students to share their voices. And really great things have kind of come out of that. But I can attest that sometimes it's hard to step back and on that space, or even I can like sometimes reflect as a teacher, and I see a lot of teachers know we don't like awkward silence. So if you pose an inquiry question to class and no one has a hand up in the first 5 seconds, you can see a lot of teachers jumping into that space and kind of filling that in. But I think it's really important for us to kind of step back a little bit and create more space for students to share their voices and give them time to do that.
Okay, and then absolutely, Bernadine, I agree that if they don't have the right answer, we have to hold back. Yeah, for sure. So hard. And I think for me, I'm kind of an introvert by nature, and so for me, I tend to be a bit quieter in the classroom anyway. So I think that's by nature, that's kind of like fell into my lap, where I didn't do as much talking, and I found the kids did more talking, which has been pretty it's been pretty great that way. And so that has been really strong as well. And it's interesting. Laura, can you elaborate a little bit on where you say we often get in the way? What do you think teachers are doing when they're getting in the way? Over-directing. Okay. Over-directing how? Like, what are you trying to get the students to do? Okay, interesting. So you try to prompt them, and okay, yeah, I think that a lot of teachers tend to do that, and we do that with the best of intentions because we want our students to be successful. And I think by nature, human beings don't like seeing others struggle, even though that's where really good learning happens. And so I think we definitely end up having that as well. Absolutely, Melanie. Giving them the time to think is super important for sure. So this slide is actually to represent the idea that student thinking can look in basically the sky's the limit as to what student thinking can look like. One of the things that I've been playing around with a lot in my classroom, that's actually in the last 2 weeks, is my students are working on their writing right now, both classes that I have in class at the moment. And one of the things that we've been doing is I have two of my 4 walls are covered in whiteboards. And I encouraged my students to get up to the board, and we were having an honest conversation about writing. It was kind of any question you've ever had about writing and you've ever wanted to know the answer to, write it on the board. And then allowing them to ask those questions and then have those good conversations was really fascinating. But the other thing the boards have been really great for is that by me not really doing a ton of the writing on the boards, having the students do a ton of the writing, I see their thoughts and see what they're thinking about. And that's been really powerful for that in terms of seeing what they're actually doing. And a lot of the times I spend a good deal of time documenting that by just taking photos and adding them to my files for each of the students as a demonstration of their thinking, because that to me is super valid. And it's low stakes because they don't really realize they're being assessed. I think that that's been really crucial. Laura, you're talking about lit circles. Yeah, we love lit circles. We love lit circles for sure. So one thing that we wanted to then move into talking about was that something that we try to do with our students is in order to get at student thinking, we try to be very explicit with what the curriculum is asking the students to do. And so it's fascinating because this is an example of the top of an assignment sheet in my grade 12 university English class. And I put the overall curriculum expectations there on the assignment sheet. And for some of the students, that was the very first time they'd seen the curriculum and had seen what they were actually being assessed on. And it was fascinating because they had no idea what they were doing. They'd never been exposed to what the actual requirements were for it. So it was really interesting that way.
Yeah, and we've talked about the assessment piece a little bit already, but I think it's really important to step back and think about if you're giving students opportunities to show their learning in different ways, how are you going to communicate that to them, and how are you going to let them know you are assessing and tracking that space. And it's not an easy shift for a lot of people, and I think it's sometimes you want to kind of play around with, really take your time with, and be very intentional in both your own thinking about what that looks like in your classroom, and then also very careful and intentional with how you're describing that to your students. And the other thing I'd highlight here too is that if you're going to explore the space with your students, they may or may not have a lot of experience with it. And so you want to be aware of that too. And I would say just having an open conversation about their experiences in that space. One thing I can speak for, I think both Jim and I, that we've kind of experienced with this is that some students love this space. If you open the doors and just kind of, hey, you've got more ownership of your learning and the ways you can demonstrate this, you're going to have some people who really, really enjoy that space and take off and fly with it. And a lot of times it might be some of your students who might not be as traditionally engaged in your classroom. But on the flip side of this, you're also going to have some students who really don't feel comfortable in this space, and they're going to struggle, and they're not going to be very happy. They might, depending what grade they're in, they might be very used to the quote-unquote game of education. You're the teacher, you tell me what I'm supposed to know, I'll learn it, I'll give it back to you, and then you give me my level 4 and we're good. And if you open up this door to, okay, no, I'm not telling you exactly how to do this, you need to kind of get messy and dirty with it yourself, and then you need to kind of use some creativity and some critical thinking to think about how you're going to demonstrate that learning to me, and kind of base it off of what I'm asking from you. You're going to find that some students will be very uncomfortable in that space. And I think it's important to put them in that uncomfortable space because that's what the real world's going to be like for them. But at the same time, you want to be knowledgeable of that and help to be able to be ready to kind of coach them through that process. And so I think being very intentional about what you're looking for from them, how you're going to be assessing, and how they can use their own personality, their own ideas to kind of fit into that space becomes very important.
The other thing, too, that we've been playing around with a lot is that taking the expectations and then turning them into success criteria and using the specific expectations to support the overall expectations, but asking then the students to look at the specific expectations and then put them in student-friendly language, and what does that actually look like to get a level 3. And so we've spent a lot of time with students looking at that, and then we add those to our assignment sheets as well, kind of almost as like a checklist for students to make sure they have completed what they need to do in order to be successful. Some of the teachers in our department also have experimented with I statements based on and using that as success criteria for our students, but derived from the curriculum expectations themselves. The other thing that we've been really having a lot of success with in terms of student voice and choice are giving students rich tasks. And so where the students can very much showcase their skills in a way that is representative of them. And so we give them all the same task, but what comes out is very, very different. And here there are actually 2 videos that we're going to ask you guys to watch. You don't need to watch the entire video with the 4 guys on there. It's a 7-minute video. But what you will see is that this is actually the exact same task, but done in a very, very different way. The guys on the left are guys who were in my class last semester who very much enjoy rap music. And what they did was that they wanted to explore the conventions of rap music and use that, and as well as rap music videos, in order to express an idea related to Macbeth. What was fascinating is when we gave this task out, they were the first group of students in the class who had an idea. They were off and running, and anytime I offered help along the way, they didn't want any because they had their own ideas and they were good. And what they came up with was a pretty solid finished product. Andrew, if you want to speak to the other video.
Sure, and so the other, like, again, as Jamie said, I'd only watch it maybe the first minute or 2 of the first video, especially if you're not into rap music. But the second one here is, and again, this is the exact same assignment. You're going to see, like, 2 very, very different things. And so the basic task here was for them to choose an element of the Shakespearean text they read. In this case, it was they had an option of reading either Macbeth or Midsummer Night's Dream. In this case, both these are on Macbeth. But the second one, she chose to look at the idea of symbols and motifs. And so she actually went into the more recent film version of Macbeth and wanted to kind of splice this version together and look at all the different ways the symbols and motifs kind of popped up in the text through the film, and then look at her media creation skills for how she could kind of blend that together. And then she also really interested, like, looked at music as well and kind of choosing a song and lyrics that would fit what she was trying to get across and timing the kind of video to that. So again, really interesting, and want to highlight too that none of these had to be videos. The students were just asked to create a media product to show their learning of the play and examine elements of the play. And so again, 2 very different examples, but 2 really, really insightful things, and much better than what we would have got from our students in the past if we kind of just guided them and directed them to a specific space.
So if Trish, if you could please pop those videos in, that would be awesome. Thank you. So if you want to go and watch each of the videos, the video with the 4 guys, please only watch the first little bit because it is a very long video. Okay, it looks like everyone is back. Laura, I wanted to give you an example. Something that you said you were concerned about was with students being concerned, and so, or worrying about introverts. So last semester, when I had this group of guys in my class, I had a student who is probably the quietest student I've ever taught. Like, she did not say anything other than, "Hi, Miss Rayburn," that was it. And she did a phenomenal product for us, but for the same assignment. She is a beautiful artist, and she took the conventions of Snapchat. She drew, instead of doing it as a Snapchat, she did a series of Snapchat stories, but she drew them in an anime style and then created a video, like put them into a video and then put her voice over top of it. It was unbelievably awesome. And students in the class, because we shared them with the group, when the students in the class saw her work, they were actually quite blown away at how talented of an artist the girl is, but also too that she was willing to share that quality that she had about herself with the group, and it was amazing. And she said to me, that was the first time that a teacher was giving me the chance to use my artistic skills for a project. And she's like, it was amazing. And truly, it's probably one of the best pieces of work that was full of deep thinking and strong representation of her understanding of the play as well as her extension of her ideas that I'd ever seen, and it was coming from the quietest student in my class. So by giving them the chance to have that opportunity to showcase it in a way that is really meaningful to them, I think it can be quite powerful for those introverts in the class.
And one thing I wanted to highlight about this assignment too that kind of came away from it was that we were looking at a few things here. One, we're looking at like reading for meaning, going back to the curriculum, and also looking at how students create meaning, use different conventions and techniques. And so through the one Jamie just described and the two that you watched, you can see like they chose very different styles to show that and even different ways of showing to understand the text, but they all got at it in very effective ways that worked for them. I think that's one of the beautiful things coming out of, again, this idea of voice and choice. I can speak for myself as an English teacher. Traditionally, one of the ways we often assess reading is through writing. And if you think about that, like if a student's not a very strong writer, they're not going to be able to demonstrate their skills as a reader too very well. And I found that in some of my applied classes, especially as a high school educator, is that if I only assess a student's understanding of a text or through reading, through writing, that if they're not a very strong writer, then as I look at their writing, I get the sense that they didn't really understand the text. But if I sit down and talk with that student for just 2 or 3 minutes about what they've read, they're sharing very, very insightful things with me. And so, again, one of the beautiful things about voice and choice is giving students different options to demonstrate their learning to in the way that suits them best. And that might be through writing, that might be through creating a media product, that might be through sitting down and having a conversation with you. And at the same time, you're always assessing, and in this example, how they are, their skills as a reader, but you're opening up opportunities for them to find ways that what's the best way for them to demonstrate that to you. Another example we want to talk about here, as it says on the screen there, we're trying to provide students with the opportunity to connect content with the world outside of school and kind of find more authentic pieces. So another example is we actually had our students do Ignite talks in our classes. And if you're not familiar with the Ignite talk format, basically it's a 5-minute presentation. They have 20 slides that are automatically timed to transition every 20 seconds. And so we're looking at how could they create that, and we looked at like the idea of screencasting, so they're actually making recordings that are presenting in front of the class. They're going to create a recording of their slide deck as it transitions, and then kind of do a voiceover on top of that. And so we'll show you how you can do that here in a little bit. It's a great opportunity for students to kind of show their learning in a different way again. But again, so we left the topic completely open to them. We're looking at their researching skills, their presentation skills, their media creation skills are all kind of leading to this rubric. They actually wrote out a script, so we looked at their writing skills here as well too, and hitting the curriculum in many different ways. But again, what became the vehicle for that was kind of really relevant. So they got to choose topics from things that were interesting to them and that they were passionate about and that they want to learn more about, and then use that as a vehicle for these presentations.
Right now, my grade 12 university students are writing essays. And unfortunately, I don't love always having to have students write essays, and we don't always write essays, but that's what my students are working on at the moment. And they have just finished reading, they were in lit circles and they were reading group novels. One of the things that I asked them to do was to pull a theme from the novel that they were reading, but then they needed to make some kind of a real world connection, whether it was to another text, like a book or a movie or whatever, or whether it was to a real life event. And then from there, what they had to really incorporate in was what they thought about all of this and what kind of message was coming at them from both texts, and then what they thought about the message as well. One of my students is actually, she read The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is a novel about an autistic boy. And within the novel, the mom leaves. And so her essay is around the idea of mother shaming, because she was talking about that when they had their group discussions, they were talking about the mom, and she stuck up for the mom because she said the mom needed to leave because she wasn't whole as a person, so how could she be a mom if she's not whole? She needed to heal herself before she could be the mother that she wanted to be, or that her son needed her to be. And she said it was really interesting. So then she got thinking about the idea of social media, and she got thinking about how society now is treating moms. And so she was showing me today she did a ton of research of how mothers are portrayed in the media and how people are using social media to mother shame. And she said it was so interesting to her to really think about this. And then she started thinking about it in context of her mom. And then she started thinking about it in the context of her friends' moms. And so she said it was so meaningful to her because here she is. She hadn't thought about what it's like to be a mom and to be a mom who's dealing with a lot of issues, and how do you manage the stress, and how do you still feel good about yourself. And so by giving them the chance to really think about what's going on outside the classroom and then bring it in. And truly what I'm assessing here are their writing skills, but she's bringing in all this other contemporary thinking and still connecting it back to the book. I read the first part of her essay, and it's just outstanding how she had taken all of those ideas and woven them together to create this almost slightly satirical piece that has a really strong message about how we are using social media, but also how we are thinking about our moms. And I can't wait to read the finished product. But the other thing too is that she's a student who's somewhat struggled with motivation all semester, and here she is like powering through this essay because it's meaningful and relevant to her. And so that piece has just been phenomenal in of itself. So one of the things that we wanted to share is that our classrooms we really hope that our students are thinking, but then they're also being reflective at the same time. And so from an assessment standpoint, we have the 3 different pieces that we're really incorporating in. We have our products, conversations, observations, the triangulation of assessment, the triangle that you would see in growing success. But in our curriculum, metacognition runs through all of our strands. But we also just think that metacognition is really, really crucial to the learning process. And so we spend a lot of time asking students to reflect on how their learning is going. And so we really want our students to understand that the learning process doesn't end when you finish a product. It's then thinking about what skills did you develop, and then how are they going to be transferable to other work that you're going to do in our class, but also in the other classes that they have and life in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so that student reflection piece is really, really important. And especially, again, when you open the doors for them to kind of take ownership and control of their own learning, it's really important they're being reflective, that they're actually learning what they're supposed to be learning or demonstrating what they're trying to show to you. I think the other piece for this is really reflecting on the process as an educator and documenting that whole space. So not just focusing on the final product that a student comes up with, but also being a part of the journey with them as they're going through that. And as students are working on different things and kind of really using their voice and choice in this space, it's important to have conversations with them along the way and make observations of them. And so even with the final product, because again, you're not doing the one size fit all where 30 students are all given the same product and you kind of coach in the same way and they kind of look at each other and see, yeah, we're all doing the same thing, we're good. Is that if the final product doesn't quite turn out the way the student wanted to, If you had some really good observations and conversations of that process for the student, you get to take that into consideration as well when you're looking at it from an assessment standpoint. So if the product sounded exactly what they wanted, if they knew where they're going, what they were trying to do to get there, you can make that part of their mark, which I think is like really comforting for the students and enables them to take some more risks and try some different things in the space as well.
So what we wanted to do was we wanted to give you some tools that you could walk away from tonight with and use tomorrow if you really wanted to in your classroom. If you can give me a check mark if you've seen FlipGrid before. And so we want, oh, Bernadine's seen it, awesome. Oh, Laura, awesome. Okay, we love FlipGrid. And so Trishka, if you could put the link in, please. Awesome, thank you. So if you guys can go, if you can go away and watch, not go away, but if you can go watch the demo video that Trish just popped in there, it explains, sorry, whoops. If you can just go watch the video, we would appreciate that so that you have some understanding of what FlipGrid is, for those of you who haven't seen it. If you have seen it, it's the video itself is actually quite excellent at talking a lot about kind of the rationale of why to use FlipGrid. And then please check mark back when you're back. It looks like almost everybody's back, other than Michelle. Okay, so what we also then wanted to do was to give you some other tools. A couple of you were in our last session, and I made an embarrassing video using Vidyard Go Video and Bitable. It's a Vidyard Go Video is a screencasting tool that's a Chrome extension that we love, and it's super easy to use. Trish, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link in there, please, that would be great. To actually all three. Awesome, thank you. We're not going to have you go watch the video at this point. We're going to be cognizant of time, but if you're interested in watching me talk about Vidyard Go Video and Bitable, which is another great little tool, feel free to do so. But we wanted to give you the chance to see a couple tools in action that allow you to have students really share their thinking in a very verbal fashion. Vidyard Go Video, I have actually started using myself on a regular basis. If I'm going to be absent from class, sometimes I will just pop open Vidyard and do a quick screencast because you can actually, those students can actually see you, or you can see your students. and I'll leave a video for my group. Sometimes if I'm participating in some other kind of online setting, I've actually spent a few minutes, taken a few minutes to just create a short little video rather than typing something out. And it's been quite enjoyable that way as well. So feel free to watch those for little demos on how to use both of them. Yeah, so we're going to move on from there. So one of the, this is actually a direct quotation from some of my students last semester. This is what they tell me, is that I ask too many hard questions. And it's quite enjoyable because my former principal used to call me the question queen. One of the things that we really try to encourage students to develop, one of the skills to develop, is the idea of asking really good questions, open-ended, deep and meaningful questions that allow the inquiry process to begin or to continue, because sometimes asking a really solid question in the middle of an inquiry takes you in a completely different way. And so this is a skill that we really focus on in our classrooms, is the idea of developing how do we ask these really hard questions, but also modeling when students are in a situation where we might probe or try to provoke thinking by asking some hard questions. Andrew, I don't think your mic is on. I'm not sure if you're talking.
Sorry, my mic wasn't on. Can you hear me now? I think my connection dropped there for a second. Yeah. Okay, good. Anyways, one thing that we've asked, and kind of Jamie spoke to modeling a little bit there, is demonstrating good listening skills to your students as well. And so I think one great way to show great listening skills is responding with really interesting questions to what people are saying. And so in English curriculum across grade 1 through grade 12, listening is actually part of the curriculum, and so one of the best ways I try to assess it is actually through responding to questions and asking insightful questions. So getting a chance to model that, I think, for your students is also really important in this space.
And so within that, we give them opportunities within the class, and we set up situations for students to ask really good questions. And so as audience members, we encourage them to ask questions if we're doing some kind of a presentation in front of the class. At the end of virtually every presentation that we do, we ask our students a lot of questions. We ask a lot about the process to model for the students that the process is really, really important. But we also ask them to really get them to think about, if you are the teacher, or if you are understanding the content, and so this is an example of a task from my 4U class, they weren't supposed to tell the audience about the essay that they had read. They were supposed to help the audience uncover and guide them to where they wanted them to go. And so one of the strategies I encouraged them to do was to develop really deep questions that they were going to ask the audience throughout their presentation to involve them within the thinking. And it was really quite fascinating watching students struggle with the idea of how do you develop a really good question. We spend a lot of time too, as well, in other parts of our course, especially in our literature circle units, where we ask students when they're reading, they have to be thinking about good questions that they would ask other people about what they've read, so that they can extend the thinking within there as well. And so by encouraging them and helping them to develop this skill, we've really seen a lot of growth in their ability to engage each other in good conversation, but also then to take learning in a variety of ways, which maybe you didn't expect, but can be really beneficial in the end.
Yeah, I think questioning becomes very important for sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
No, sorry, go ahead. I think there was some lag.
I was going to say, I think questioning becomes a great way for students to demonstrate their learning too. We talked about different spaces where you can look at using voice and choice. I think the inquiry process is a great space to do that. And sometimes that starts with a kind of big idea or big questions for the teacher, but then that kind of leads into the students asking a bunch of questions themselves and searching out their answers. So as you start thinking about that space, I think that becomes very important too.
This is another quote from some students. When it comes to thinking about how they wanted to involve the group in their lessons that they had to share with the group, and not lessons, but their presentation that they had to share with the class. One of the things that the students said to me was that they actually figured, by me assigning this task, they figured out what I was doing. And they thought it was hilarious because then they figured out the method to my madness. And they said, oh, well, we know what you're doing, and so therefore we're going to copy that in our presentation because we actually enjoy it. So the students told me they actually like the fact that I don't provide them with all the answers, even though it's frustrating to some of them. That the fact that I ask them more questions than I give them answers allows them to really have a strong voice within the classroom, and they feel respected, and that they feel heard, that people in the class listen, I listen, and then they're allowed to share their thinking in a really safe space within the room. And that's been really phenomenal within that, in our learning environment. So then, to follow that up, my students had to also complete a reflection. And one of the things that they really enjoyed, and this was a common theme throughout many of the reflections, was that they'd never done this before, and they thought, why aren't we doing presentations like this? Because we have a class of 30. They were group presentations. It took 3-4 days to get through all of the groups, and truthfully some of the groups took half the class because they just had created these really deep, meaningful questions that people were engaged in and really wanted to share their thinking, and they really had a lot to say about it because the students themselves had made it relatable to everybody else in the room. And from there, by setting it up that way, it allowed our students to really reflect that they enjoyed using this as well.
So I'd love to speak this one is the idea that teachers love the illusion of control. I joke with this. Like, we always think about, like, I think a lot of teachers are type A and being quote unquote in control of their classes, and so that's one of the reasons we kind of push. Maybe you want to stick into that teacher-centric model and be at the core of our classes. But I think it's really important to step back and hopefully highlight a lot of ideas for you tonight about the benefits that come out of student voice and choice, and empowering your students in your classroom to kind of take more control of their own learning and the ways they can demonstrate that.
I agree. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that Andrew and I have spent some time at an elementary school in this past semester, and their classrooms at this elementary school, feeder elementary school of ours, they would look like chaos to some teachers because there are kids doing things all over the room. It's a very productive buzz in the room, but it's all over the place. And so for us, having students really working on their own ideas and completing the work that way allows the students to really feel like they're in control. And even though we like to think we're in control, the goal is to have the students really driving their own learning. And by allowing us to give up the control, or as Andrew says, realize that it's an illusion, it really allows the students to take ownership of their learning. And in truth, sometimes it doesn't always work out. Controlled chaos, that's true. It doesn't always work out, and that's okay too. One of the things that students really, I firmly believe students need to see happen is they need to see teachers messing up. They need to see us, A, as human beings, and B, that adults make mistakes, but also that, C, that's part of learning. And if we are the lead learners in the room, then we have to make mistakes, and that's okay because that's how learning really happens. If something doesn't go the way you had planned, you stop, reevaluate, and figure out where you need to go from there to achieve the goals that you had set out. Or maybe your goals need to change, and then therefore you have a new goal. And so I think that it's okay to make mistakes. Goodness knows my students see me making mistakes all of the time, but we laugh about it, and then we talk about it, and move on from there and figure out what do we need to do to continue. And it makes for a really lovely learning environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always believed our best teacher is our quote-unquote failures. And I think a really important space that comes around with voice and choice is changing the cultural mentality in your classroom, how a lot of students look at learning, and the idea of like taking risks and trying new things and experimenting. It should be a safe space and a good space and where great learning happens. And getting in that space where it's okay if the final product or that demonstration doesn't turn out exactly the way you want it. And as we talked about earlier, taking in observation and conversation, the process becomes very important in that space too, because if a product doesn't turn out the way its students wanted to, they may have the learning down. You can observe that in that space. It's not a hindrance or it doesn't hurt their assessment in a way at the mark at the end of the day, because you can still see that learning happening. And so I think making that shift and creating that space, one, it pushes students away from caring about the number and the grade as much and focusing more on learning. And then for you as an educator, I think it comes in a really important space in that too for, again, as Jamie said, students seeing you handling your quote-unquote failures and learning from it, moving on, and then model that for students to kind of feel comfortable in that space as well.
And that brings us to the end, a few minutes early, which on a beautiful night like this, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But if you, yes, the teacher is the lead learner, yes, definitely. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and or connect with us on Twitter. You're very welcome to do that as well. Laura, awesome. Spread it. It's a great term. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We feel really honored to be able to share our learning in the classroom and to learn from you guys as well tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for being here. I say this every time we do these OTF Connect webinars, but I'm always crazy impressed by Ontario educators and how they're willing to give them an hour and a half of their own nights to take time and just do the professional development learning. So we hope you took at least something away from this. As I mentioned earlier, please feel free to reach out to both Jamie or I anytime. You can find us on Twitter there with our Twitter handles. And please don't leave yet, because I know Trish is going to want to jump in here, has a few things to say to you before you head off.
Lovely segue. Thank you, Andrew. And I'll add my thanks as well. We love it when people really hang on to the end of the sessions, and especially the end of our season here. I'm going to just quick stop the recording.